What happens when a woman who has made a career out of being the smartest person at the table discovers, on live television, in front of millions, that she has been outsmarted by the man in basketball shorts? Adam Sandler has spent 4 decades being underestimated. Critics have called him lazy, award shows have ignored him, entire think pieces have been written about why his movies represent the decline of American cinema. And through all of it, he has remained the most successful comedian of his generation, a man who turned being counted out into a billion-dollar industry. He has never needed to prove anything to anyone. Until the morning Joy Behar decided that his refusal to fight back was the same thing as an inability to fight back. What she didn't understand, what she couldn't have understood, is that Adam Sandler had been absorbing punches his entire life. And when he finally threw one back, nobody in that studio saw it coming, not even him. Subscribe and drop a comment below. Because what happened next on The View is something Joy Behar will never be able to undo. When the cameras rolled and Whoopi Goldberg welcomed him to the set, the audience response was massive. Not polite applause, but genuine, full-throated excitement. People loved Adam Sandler. They loved him the way you love a friend who makes you laugh when you don't want to, who shows up to your party in sweatpants and somehow becomes the best person there. Sandler ambled to the guest chair with that trademark walk, part shuffle, part bounce, and dropped into it with the casual grace of a man sitting down at his own kitchen table. He waved to the audience with a goofy, open-mouthed grin. "Hey everybody, thanks for coming. I know you had other options. You could have been at home watching my movies on Netflix, but instead you chose to see me in person, which is much worse." The audience laughed, the hosts laughed, even the camera operators were grinning. This was the Adam Sandler experience. Instant warmth, instant connection, the room temperature rising by several degrees the moment he sat down. Sarah Haynes asked about the new film, and Sandler talked about it with a sincerity that occasionally caught people off guard. He described working with young actors, learning from the basketball consultants, and the challenge of making people laugh and cry within the same scene. "That's the hard part," he said, leaning back in his chair like he was talking to friends at a barbecue. "The comedy's easy for me. I've been doing that since I was 6. But the crying stuff, man, I had to really dig for that. My wife kept telling me I was bringing the sadness home, and my daughters were like, 'Dad, please stop being deep. It's weird.'" The audience laughed again. Whoopi was nodding with genuine appreciation. Sarah looked charmed. Alyssa was smiling broadly. Everything was working exactly as it should. Joy Behar had been watching all of this with the expression of someone waiting for a door to open. She had been unusually quiet during the first 5 minutes of the interview, which the other hosts recognized as preparation. Joy was loading. She sat with her chin resting on one hand, her eyes fixed on Sandler with that particular intensity that meant she had already written the narrative in her head and was now just waiting for the right moment to introduce it. "You know, Adam," Joy said, and the slight downshift in her tone made every other host at the table subtly adjust their posture. "I have to be honest about something." Sandler turned to her with his open, guileless expression. "Oh boy, that's never good when someone starts with, 'I have to be honest.'" The audience laughed, but Joy didn't. "I've been watching your career for a long time," she continued, "and I've never quite been able to figure out the puzzle. You make these broad comedies that critics despise, and then every few years you show up in something like Uncut Gems or Punch Drunk Love, and you're brilliant. Genuinely brilliant. And then you go right back to making movies where you fall down a lot and talk in silly voices." She paused, letting the characterization settle over the room like a fine dust. "So my question is, which one is the real Adam Sandler? The artist, or the guy in basketball shorts making fart jokes for Netflix?" The studio went quiet. Not silent. There was a murmur, the sound of an audience collectively registering that something had shifted. Sandler's expression didn't change outwardly, but anyone who had watched him closely in Uncut Gems would have recognized something in his eyes, a faint tightening, a momentary stillness beneath the goofball surface. "Well," Sandler said, and his voice was still light, still casual, but there was a precision to his word choice that hadn't been there before. "I think both of those guys are me, Joy. The guy who wants to make his friends laugh, and the guy who wants to make people feel something. They're not different people, they're the same person on different days. But don't you think you're wasting your talent? Joy pressed, leaning forward with that predatory certainty she wore when she believed she had a guest cornered. I mean, you were genuinely Oscar-worthy in Uncut Gems. The performance was extraordinary. And then your next project was a movie where you, and I'm not making this up, played a man who accidentally adopts a kangaroo. A few people in the audience laughed uncomfortably. The other hosts exchanged glances. Sarah's smile had frozen in place, and Whoopi's hand was resting flat on the table, her anchoring gesture, the one she used when she was preparing to intervene. Sandler's grin was still there, but it had thinned. The kangaroo movie was actually a lot of fun to make, and a lot of families enjoyed it. Kids loved it. I'm not going to apologize for making something that made kids happy. Nobody's asking you to apologize, Joy said, but the way she said it made it clear she believed he should. I'm just saying that there's a difference between entertainment and art, and you seem determined to choose entertainment every single time, even when you've proven you're capable of so much more. Sandler was quiet for a moment. The audience could feel the gears turning behind those dark eyes that had been making people laugh for decades. You know what, Joy? I appreciate that, he said, and his voice was warmer than the question deserved. But I think you might be operating from a premise that I don't agree with. What premise is that? The premise that making people laugh is somehow less valuable than making them think. The words landed with unexpected weight. Joy blinked, recalibrated. Well, of course comedy has value, but there's comedy that challenges people, and comedy that, let's be honest, just goes for the cheapest laugh possible. And you think that's what I do? Sandler said. It wasn't a question. I think you're capable of more than you allow yourself to be, Joy said, and she clearly believed she was paying him a compliment. The condescension was so natural to her that she didn't even register it as condescension. And I think your audience might be holding you back. The word audience fell on the studio like a cold hand on a warm neck. Sandler's eyes moved from Joy to the crowd, his crowd, the people who had been laughing with him since they were kids watching Billy Madison on VHS, and then back to Joy. Something changed in his face, not anger, something quieter than anger and far more dangerous. My audience is holding me back, he repeated slowly. Joy seemed to realize she might have misjudged something, but she was committed now. I just mean that maybe if you weren't so focused on pleasing the masses, you could do more meaningful work, the kind of work that earns awards and... Awards, Sandler said, and for the first time, the word came out with an edge that had nothing goofy about it. You want to talk about awards, Joy? The temperature in the room dropped. I didn't win an Oscar for Uncut Gems, Sandler continued, his voice still conversational, but carrying a frequency that made people lean forward. I didn't even get nominated. I gave what critics called the performance of a lifetime, and the Academy didn't even put my name on the ballot. You know what happened the day those nominations came out? Joy shook her head slightly, her expression uncertain for the first time. I was coaching my daughter's basketball team, Sandler said. 6-year-olds. I was running a layup drill when my phone started blowing up. And for about 30 seconds, I was hurt. I'm not going to lie about that. 30 seconds of real hurt. And then one of the kids on the team, a little girl named Maya, she ran up to me and said, "Coach Sandler, watch this." And she did the worst layup I've ever seen in my life. Just bricked it off the side of the backboard. And she turned around with this huge smile on her face, like she'd just won the championship. He paused. The studio was absolutely still. And I thought, this is what matters. Not some statue on a shelf, not some industry that decides every year which artists are worthy and which ones aren't. This kid, right here, smiling at me because I showed up. That's the award. The audience was holding its breath. Sandler's voice had dropped to something intimate and raw, the same register he had used in the final scenes of Uncut Gems, when the character he played realized that everything he had been chasing was already behind him. Joy tried to regroup. That's a lovely story, Adam, but surely you understand that I'm not finished, Joy. The three words stopped her cold. Adam Sandler, the man who had never in his entire public life been anything other than gentle, deferential, self-deprecating to a fault, had just told Joy Behar to stop talking. And the way he said it made it clear that he meant it. You asked me which Adam Sandler is real, he continued, and now he was looking at her with an intensity that seemed incompatible with everything the world thought it knew about him. The answer is all of them, every single one. The guy who made Happy Gilmore is real, the guy who made Uncut Gems is real, the guy who makes movies with his friends so they can spend the summer together and laugh and get paid to do something they love, that guy is real too. And I'm not going to sit here and let you rank them. Joy's jaw tightened. I'm not ranking anything. I'm asking legitimate questions about artistic integrity. No, Sandler said, and his voice was quiet, but it filled the entire studio. You're doing what people have been doing to me for 30 years. You're telling me that the thing I love doing, making regular people laugh, making kids happy, making families sit together on a couch and forget their problems for 90 minutes, you're telling me that doesn't count, that it's not enough, that I should be chasing some other version of success that you've decided is more legitimate. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on Joy with the kind of focus that actors spend entire careers trying to achieve. Let me tell you something about my audience, Joy. Since you think they're holding me back, my audience includes nurses who work 12-hour shifts and come home and put on one of my movies because they need to laugh before they fall asleep. My audience includes kids who are being bullied at school, who watch my movies because for 2 hours, the weird kid wins. My audience includes families who don't agree on anything else in the world but can sit together and watch a Sandler movie and remember that they love each other. His voice cracked slightly on the last phrase, and the crack was more powerful than any shout could have been. And you think that's less valuable than an Oscar? You think that's less meaningful than some critic at a film festival telling me I'm a genius? Those families are my Oscars, Joy. Every single one of them. The audience broke into spontaneous applause. Not the polite, prompted kind, but the real thing. The sound of people responding to something that had touched a nerve they didn't know was exposed. Joy sat motionless through it, her face a mask that was beginning to show hairline cracks. When the applause subsided, Joy made her move. The wrong move. The move she would replay in her mind for months. That's very sentimental, Adam, she said, and the word sentimental was delivered with just enough dismissiveness to reveal exactly what she thought of everything he had just shared. But sentimentality is not the same as substance, and I think deep down, even you know that some of your films are, frankly, beneath you. The studio went dead silent. Sandler stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the boom operators had to adjust their equipment. You know who told me something like that once? He said. Chris Farley. The name landed like a depth charge. Everyone in the room knew the weight of it. Chris Farley, Sandler's closest friend, his SNL brother, the man whose death in 1997 had left a wound that Sandler had never fully discussed in public. We were sitting in his apartment in New York, Sandler continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. This was about a year before he died, and he said, "Sandy, you think people are ever going to take us seriously?" And I said, "Who cares? We make people laugh. That's the best thing anyone can do." And he said, "Yeah, but sometimes I wish they knew we could do more." Sandler paused. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. He was doing something harder than crying. He was holding it together through sheer force of will, the way he had been holding it together since December 18th, 1997. Chris never got to show them what he could do. He never got his uncut gems. He never got to prove that the funny guy could break your heart. And I carry that with me every single day. Every movie I make, whether it's the silly one or the serious one, I'm making it for him, because he didn't get to. The silence in the studio was total. Sarah Haynes had her hand pressed over her mouth. Alyssa was looking down at the table, blinking rapidly. Whoopi sat perfectly still, her expression locked in something between reverence and fury. Reverence for what Sandler had just shared, fury at the person who had pushed him into a corner where he had to share it. Joy's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Adam, I didn't mean to." "Yeah, you did," Sandler said, and his voice was kind. That was the devastating part. It wasn't angry, it wasn't bitter, it was kind, the way you're kind to someone you feel sorry for. "You meant every word, Joy. You came into this interview thinking you were going to teach me something about myself, thinking you were going to be the one to finally get Adam Sandler to admit that he's been wasting his potential all these years." He stood up from his chair, slowly, like a man who had been sitting for a very long time and was stretching muscles he had forgotten about. "But here's what you don't understand. I'm not wasting anything. I'm spending it exactly the way I want to. I make movies with my best friends. I coach my kids' sports teams. I sell out arenas doing stand-up. I've got a deal with Netflix that lets me make whatever I want, however I want, whenever I want. And I get to do all of that because 40 million families decided that the guy in basketball shorts who makes fart jokes is worth their time." He looked out at the audience, his audience, and gave them the grin, the real one, the one that had been making people feel better about the world since he was doing funny voices on Saturday Night Live. "You know what my kids said to me this morning before I left for the show?" Sandler said, turning back to Joy. "They said, 'Dad, be nice. Even if they're not nice to you, be nice.'" He straightened his wrinkled Knicks t-shirt with mock formality, as if adjusting a tuxedo. "So, I'm gonna be nice, Joy. I'm not going to say anything mean about you, even though you've spent the last 20 minutes telling me and my fans that the thing we love isn't good enough. I'm not going to attack your career, even though you opened the door. I'm just going to tell you something my mom told me when I was 12 years old, and kids at school were making fun of me for being the class clown." He leaned toward Joy, and his voice carried the gentleness of someone delivering a truth they wished they didn't have to deliver. She said, "Adam, the people who tell you that making others laugh isn't important are the people who have forgotten how to laugh. And forgetting how to laugh is the saddest thing that can happen to a person." He held Joy's gaze for one more second. Then he did something no one expected. He winked at her. Not sarcastically, not cruelly. A genuine, warm Adam Sandler wink. The kind that said, "I don't hate you, but I'm done here. Thanks for having me on the show," he said to Whoopi, extending his hand. "Sorry about the shorts." Whoopi took his hand with both of hers and held it longer than protocol called for. "Don't you dare apologize for anything," she said, and her voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with wardrobe. Adam Sandler walked off the stage of The View the same way he had walked on, slouching, shuffling, looking like a guy on his way to pick up takeout. But something was different now. The audience knew it, the hosts knew it, and Joy Behar, sitting alone with the wreckage of an interview she had expected to control, knew it most of all. She had tried to expose the man behind the clown. Instead, she had proven that the clown and the man were the same person, and that person was stronger, smarter, and more decent than she had been prepared to handle. When they cut to commercial, the control room was silent. The other hosts were silent, the audience was silent, and Joy Behar sat staring at the empty guest chair, trying to figure out how a man in cargo shorts and a Dorito-stained t-shirt had just delivered the most devastating thing anyone had ever said to her on live television, without raising his voice once.